Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay, I can start?
Yes.
Great. Hello. Should I look at the camera?
Up to you.
For you. Okay, alright. Hello, my name is Michelle Devoe. I am a PhD candidate at UC Berkeley in Earth and Planetary Science. I study geophysics. And today, I'm going to talk to you about one of my projects, which is investigating the mechanics of the deep Earth. So my talk is entitled, What's Going On Down There? An experimental exploration of intergranular dynamics of the deep Earth using high pressure and temperature synchrotron X-ray diffraction techniques. I'll go into what all this means in a little bit. Just another shout out, I am a doctoral fellow at the Advanced Light Source, the synchrotron at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, where I work on beamlengths 1232 and 1222. And I'm also a Hertz to Hertz Humanity Eternal Explorer. Let's start with the very basic fundamentals. What is a mineral? A mineral can be defined as a naturally occurring, macroscopically homogeneous compound with a regular crystal structure. That regular crystal structure is what's key. The periodic array of atoms in a crystal structure is what allows us to study them because they are predictable and they behave in ordered ways. So some minerals you may be familiar with are halite, NaCl, also known as table salt. This is what its crystal form looks like, and this is what it could look like in hand sample. So those crystals are a little bit bigger than what you'd see on your table. Another mineral you may be familiar with is quartz. SiO2 is the formula, and this is the the crystal structure, its crystal morphology, and what it may look like in hand sample. You also may be familiar with quartz. Its other names are amethyst, which looks purple, as well as rose quartz, which is pink. You will hear me talk about grains in this talk, which are essentially small crystals, little pieces of crystals, just smaller versions of what you see here. They are also comprised of the same periodic array. And just another clarification, rocks are made of minerals. So they're comprised of many different types of minerals of many different sizes. So it's a composite. Some minerals you may have seen before, or just really beautiful minerals that I like. If you are interested in mineralogy, there are often a lot of really beautiful exhibits at natural history museums, and near us we have the California Academy of Sciences. So, some rocks we can see, such as Half Dome in Yosemite National Park in the Sierras in California. It's a granodiorite. And for example, the sandstones in Bryce Canyon National Park in Utah. Rocks that we can see on the surface are we're more easily able to study them because we can touch them, we can see them. But what about the rocks we can't see? So this is a cross-section of the Earth from the Earth's surface where we exist to the center of the inner core. In a larger image, it looks something like this, surface to the inner core. The rocks that we can see comprise only a very small volume of the overall total volume of the Earth. So what's going on in areas called the mantle, which is just below the surface of the Earth before we get to the inner core? How do we study what this is made out of and how it behaves and how it moves? There's a couple different ways that we do this. And there's a couple different reasons why we do this. First off, mantle rocks, so rocks from the mantle, from inside here, can be exhumed or lifted out onto the surface of the Earth. So then we can touch them, feel them, analyze them. We can also use seismic waves. So when an earthquake goes off, it'll send surface waves over the surface of the Earth and body waves through the body of the planet, through the interior of the planet. We can receive that signal somewhere else on the Earth at a seismic station, say in Hawaii or Alaska. And depending on the signal that we receive at those seismic stations, we can infer information about the density of the material, that the wave traveled through. We can also model, and we can also do something called in situ experiments, which is what I do. And the reason why we're interested in this is because the mechanics of what's happening in the interior of the mantle may help drive things like mantle convection and plate tectonics. So some of these things, these larger global scale processes that we've witnessed, like the movement of tectonic plates, but we don't yet know how to explain them. So, as I said, I do in situ experiments to confirm what the interior of the Earth is actually made out of. And why is it that we do that, and what is it that I'm exactly trying to study? So what we notice when we look at the seismic waves, for example, that's one of the things I told you that we could use to study the interior of the Earth, is that we see areas of anisotropy. And what is anisotropy? So anisotropy is in contrast to isotropy, and it suggests an anisotropic medium. So an isotropic medium, you can observe a phenomenon equally in all directions, but when you send a signal, such as a seismic wave, through an anisotropic medium, it will look different in different directions. So it may travel faster along this axis than it would along this axis, for example. And this anisotropy can be related to, at least in our world, can be related to a patterned structure. So in this case, the material is layered. It has a regular arrangement of, you can call these crystals for our example, or grains, as opposed to randomly oriented grains. And this inherent structure in this material causes the wave to move through it in an anisotropic, or in an anisotropic way, or it's observed to be an anisotropic medium. So one of the things that we look at when we measure what's called azimuthal anisotropy, which is how that anisotropy is dependent upon the azimuthal direction. So that's the compass direction, east-west versus north-south, can be given to us by something called shear wave splitting, where a shear wave interacts with an anisotropic volume, and a shear wave is produced by an earthquake. And what happens when it hits that anisotropic volume is it splits into a fast wave and a slow wave. Those fast waves and slow waves are then measured by a seismic station somewhere on the surface of the Earth, and the difference between them can tell us the degree of anisotropy in the medium. So here we have the west coast of North America. Here you can see Baja, and a cross-section from A to B, the depth of which is shown here. This would be A, and this would be B. We see that there is a high level of anisotropy here, along the out in the Pacific, and as soon as we hit the coast, and an absence of anisotropy as we make our way east. These blue lines indicate the fast direction of shear wave splitting, or the fast direction of the component, and it shows that there is if this is north, that the blue lines are oriented perpendicular to that along the east-west direction, indicating that there's azimuthal anisotropy in the east-west direction as opposed to the north-south direction. So what does that mean? That means when a seismic wave hits it, the wave will travel faster east-west than it would north-south. What is that caused by? Probably an ordered structure in some way, as opposed to random orientations. And so when we look at seismic waves through the center of the Earth, or that travel through the body of the Earth, we see that there are horizons or depth levels of the Earth that have such anisotropy. So, which suggests that non-random arrangement of grains. And what I try to understand is what could possibly be causing that non-random arrangement of grains. So there's a couple of theory sources of anisotropy, such as differential stress. Usually differential stress, where one stress is greater in one direction than in another direction, causes preferred orientation. And this preferred orientation can either be due to something called the crystallographic direction, which is based on that crystal lattice, which I showed you an image of in the first slide, the periodic array of atoms, or it's something called shape preferred orientation, which is a similar process, but is based on the crystal, the grain's shape, rather than the crystal lattice. And so you can imagine it looks something like this, where we have, these words aren't so important, but where you have an orientation of stress, a direction of flow, and these crystals align themselves along the direction of flow rather than being randomly oriented. This would be an example of crystallographic preferred orientation or shape preferred orientation. And so we believe that this could be possible sources of anisotropy that we see in the deep earth. So how do I study if these crystals preferentially align with the stress in the deep earth? Well, the first thing I have to do is create those minerals which exist at high pressure and high temperature conditions. So I have to simulate that and then deform them to see how they behave. So if I want to study a crystal that occurs here between the upper mantle and the lower mantle, which is at a pressure of around 24 or 25 GPa, I've got to synthesize that mineral somehow. And the way that I do that is this is a phase diagram which shows the relative stabilities of different types of minerals at different conditions, with temperature on the horizontal axis and pressure on the vertical axis. So what I do is I take some olivine, which we can find here on the surface of the earth, and increase the pressure to 25 GPa and heat it to transform it to my ideal mineral of perovskite, which I will refer to also as bridgemanite. And the way that I do this, the way that I synthesize these deep earth conditions, is with something called a diamond anvil cell. A diamond anvil cell looks something like this, where between two diamonds we place a tiny amount of mineral, either a single crystal or a powder. I use a couple grains, and we push the diamonds together to generate very high pressures, and then we heat it with an infrared laser, and then we diffract it with a synchrotron X-ray beam to see how the crystal structure changes as we stress it, as we increase the pressure. This research, where I study how these minerals behave under stress, is done at the ALS, the Advanced Light Source, the synchrotron at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And for this research, I used the beamline 1222, which is the non-ambient beamline. My experimental setup looks something like this, which looks like a jumble of wires and tubes. But essentially what we do here is we load that diamond anvil cell here into the X-ray beam path, which goes along a trajectory something like this. Once that X-ray beam hits the diamond anvil cell, it creates a diffraction pattern that's collected on this detector here. In the schematic, it looks something like this, where this is our diamond anvil cell, this is our X-ray beam hitting the diamond anvil cell, and this is an example diffraction pattern that we measure on a detector just beyond that. This is what it looks like using some cameras. We can see this is our sample right here, and we heat it with this infrared laser. We scan that laser around to heat it and transform it to bridgemanite perovskite, which is the mineral I'm studying. And so what I do is I continue to collect these diffraction patterns as I increase temperature and increase pressure. So this is a diffraction pattern which is showing you basically what the inside of the diamond anvil cell looks like at our starting conditions at 0 GPa. I then increase the pressure, I squeeze those diamonds together to increase the pressure to 30 GPa, and I collect another diffraction pattern. And then I continue to increase the pressure to 64 GPa, and this brings us down to the mid-lower mantle, and collect another diffraction pattern. As you can see, the spots on each of these diffraction patterns look a little bit different, and those spots is what's telling us how those grains are moving around and how they're behaving as we continue to stress them out. So basically, I take those spots and I assign them a grain. And here I've assigned 3 grains, just for example, onto a diffraction pattern. 1 grain is blue, 1 grain is red, and 1 grain is green. And I track these grains as we increase pressure to see how these grains move. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm reconstructing what's inside that diamond anvil cell. And so what you can see here is just a representation of that sample chamber where the mineral exists inside the diamond anvil cell. Each one of these spots represents a grain. And on the left here we have equivalent strain given by blue to green, with green being higher equivalent strain and blue being lower. And on the right we have different orientations of each grain. So really what we're able to do is reconstruct what's going on inside of our tiny little microcosm of the interior of the Earth. And to get back to that question of anisotropy, are these grains becoming more ordered or less ordered, or do they not show any order at different pressures that simulate or that represent the mantle? I look at how the grains are oriented at different pressure steps. So, for example, we don't need to know exactly, what these plots are in detail, but what I do want you to know, and what I'll just say is we call them pole figures, and they show us their stereographic projections of that show us the orientation of grains of their 3 different axes. So basically, you can think of this as being the C axis of the grain, the B axis, and the A axis. Each one of these little blue dots represents 1 grain. At 60 GPa, which is our pressure step, we heat it for 60 minutes using that infrared laser. We take a diffraction pattern. We actually take a series of diffraction patterns and stitch them together. And then what we reconstruct is we see that all of the C axes of our sample chamber are relatively aligned in the center here of our pole figure. And the center here represents the direction of pressure, the direction of compression. So what this tells us is that the C-axis of our bridgemanite grains are all relatively aligned along the axis of compression. And you could think that it looks something like this, where that long axis of each of these grains is aligned parallel to the direction of compression. We also notice that there are 2 populations, one shown here in orange and another shown here in black, that just say that they're rotated 90 degrees relative to each other. I then increase the pressure 4 GPa and I take another series of diffraction patterns. I now notice that the A-axis is aligned in the center of this pole figure, showing that the A-axis is now aligned parallel to the direction of compression. So, what does this mean? Well, it tells us that there is the possibility for crystallographic preferred orientation to exist at these pressures at the interior of the Earth, which is what we were able to experimentally confirm here using diamond anvil cell research, using high pressure, high temperature research. So, and the reason why this is important is because while seismic waves may tell us that anisotropy exists, seismic waves only provide a low resolution idea of what's going on at different levels of the Earth. Whereas experimentally, we can confirm in high resolution what those mechanisms actually look like that could be contributing to something like anisotropy. And the way that I do that is I look at how minerals deform using diamond anvil cell research and synchrotron X-ray diffraction to confirm any of those sort of ordered patterns that could contribute to anisotropy at different mantle conditions. And what I showed you today was a couple of deformation mechanisms that we see at 60 and 64 GPa for bridgemanite, a type of perovskite that is we believe to be comprising around 80% of the volume of the mantle. And so I just like to thank my supporters, which have been H2H8, the NSF, and the US DOE SCGSR student research grant. So thanks very much.